as an industry, because I'm in this for the same reason as Bradley, I want to change the industry. And we really have to change the industry. And that means we have to create a little bit of understanding of what goes on. So if we just move to the next one, I thought that we should talk about forces. And I'm hoping that Bradley has some great research on some of these things, because I've just basically put them up here. So let's look at the first thing that is making you bounce, and that is the ground force, right? So the ground force is when the horse meets the ground and the force travels up through the horse, and then it hits you as a rider, and then you bounce back on the horse's back. If you can't, if you're not posting or can't make in the rhythm with the horse. So we have, this is the first problem, because the ground force and the horse moving, actually your body has to be able to absorb those forces, and it has to go through the whole body before it comes back down. And if you haven't absorbed it, you can't be effective, because the next hit is gonna hit before you're ready. And this actually puts a little bit, then you have to put thinking in, and I'm actually going to ask Bradley here what he's done, because it means that you need a density in your panel and in your saddle tree that actually matches the forces of the horse. Have you been looking at that, Bradley?
Oh, yes, and more.
Yay.
So things which we look at is obviously such as ground force. That is a relatively constant once you know the weight of the horse, and you can then understand the weight of the rider. You can calculate it. What we also then do, specifically to us, is we measure the density of the horse's musculature. And now that's a really difficult thing, because you're trying to essentially measure muscle tone.
Now before it's toned.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to consider things like hair and fat layers and various things like that as well. So this is where it becomes quite fascinating. So you can, we use something called a durometer, which is an industry standard in other industries, where you can then measure the density of the zone, the area which is having the saddle on. Now, what you also then have to factor in is how that tone or how that muscle changes from being theoretically relaxed to then being contracted. So we've had to do lots of research in terms of different horses at different performance levels and their variations in tone or muscle contraction. And the irony is, and this is giving a little bit of knowledge away, but hey ho, people know me, I'm quite free with it. If you ask, if you ask the right questions, you'll get the answers. So the thing is that actually muscle tone in a high performance horse, when it's relaxed and when it's competing, is actually quite similar. There's not that much variation in terms of the tone or the muscle density of a high performance horse when it is supposedly relaxed and kind of chilled out, compared to when the muscle is actually contracted. Now,
have you figured out the reason for that? Because I'm going to touch on that.
I'm
going to touch on balance and tension and relaxation when you have balance.
We know the reason, like physiologically. Now the difficulty is, so that's why in some regards, creating a product for a high performance animal is relatively easy, because it's kind of consistent. So it's much easier to predict. The difficulty comes, which we all experience as saddle fitters, is the lower performance horses. And the problem is you can have a horse which is overtly relaxed. And then when the muscle contracts, you've got this big range of muscle tone from quite chilled out and relaxed, quite floppy, to then suddenly full on hard contraction when the horse is performing. And that is a real difficult kind of thing to solve in terms of this horse's, how do you pad? How do you protect that horse's back? How do you protect the rider?
Just another comment here. The industry is standing on the shoulders of the amateurs. So we do need to be catering for the majority rather than the minority. Two comments I've got is that the industry has not yet been forced to consider the saddle as a piece of sporting equipment. That's where the difference lies, and that's what's different about our industry.
And this is exactly why we're talking about forces.